My granddaughter whispered something to me at the breakfast table on a Tuesday morning in late October, 2024, and by the time I had finished my coffee, I knew that everything I had been quietly building for the past 2 years was about to matter in a way I had not planned for. She leaned across the table while her mother was in the shower, her voice so low I had to bend my whole body toward her to catch the words. She said Grandma had been taking money out of her bank account. The one with the pink piggy bank picture on the card. The one we had opened together when she was 3 days old and I had stood in the branch with her sleeping against my chest and handed over the first deposit myself. I kept my face completely still. I tucked a strand of hair behind her ear and told her she was very brave for telling me. Then I poured her more orange juice and asked if she wanted the pancakes with the blueberries or the plain ones. She said blueberries. I made the pancakes. And then I drove to the bank. But to understand what happened at that kitchen table 3 days later, to understand why my ex-husband's hands were shaking when I placed those statements in front of him, you need to understand how we got here and who all of us really are. Let me take you back to the beginning of this particular story. My name is Nora Scott. I am 41 years old. I have one biological daughter, Lee, who is 23, and one biological grandchild, a girl named Rosie, who just turned 6 in September. Lee's father is my ex-husband, a man named Gerald Holt. We divorced when Lee was 11. The divorce was not violent, but it was not clean either. Gerald had a way of making every problem in his life feel like something that had been done to him by someone else, and for the 12 years of our marriage, I had been the nearest available target for that particular narrative. When I left, I took Lee, the car that was registered in my name, and approximately $6,000 in a personal savings account I had been quietly building since the year Lee started school. Gerald kept the house. He kept the furniture. He kept the friends who had been his friends first. He also kept the habit of making financial decisions based on what he needed right now without particular concern for what those decisions might cost later. He remarried about 4 years after our divorce. His second wife is a woman named Donna Holt, née Castillo. Donna is 54. She is Gerald's age. She was warm to me at Lee's graduation in a way that felt genuine, and I want to be honest about that because I do not think Donna is a bad person. I think she has spent 20 years managing Gerald's reality for him, and that over time that kind of labor reshapes a person in ways they don't fully see. Gerald and Donna live in the house Gerald kept from the divorce. It is a 3 bedroom in a suburb about 40 minutes from where I now live with Lee and Rosie. Lee moved back in with me 14 months ago, after Rosie's father, a man I will call by his first name only, Derek, because he is not a central figure in this story, left the picture. Derek is not in Rosie's life in any meaningful way. He is not on the medical fund documentation. He is not relevant to what happened. What matters is that Lee came home, and Rosie came with her, and I moved from my apartment into a slightly larger house so we could all fit, and we built something that worked. The medical fund was established when Rosie was 4 days old. I opened it at a branch of Midwest Heritage Bank. The account was in trust, with me listed as the guardian trustee and Lee listed as co-trustee. It held $3,400 by the time Rosie turned 6. Every dollar of that came from me, from Lee's small contributions when she could manage them, and from a $200 deposit my own mother had made on Rosie's first birthday. The fund existed because Rosie had been identified at her 18-month dental screening as likely to need orthodontic and possibly structural dental work starting around age 7 or 8. Her pediatric dentist, a woman named Dr. Yuki Tanaka, had been very clear with us at that appointment that starting a dedicated fund early was the smart move. We started it that same week. Gerald knew about the fund. He had been told about it at a family dinner approximately 8 months before any of this happened. Lee had mentioned it in passing while talking about Rosie's dental checkup. Gerald had nodded and said that was very smart. I had thought at the time that he meant it. Now I need to tell you about the year and a half before that October morning, because you need to understand the pressure Gerald was operating under, and you need to understand what I had been quietly doing during that same period, because both of those things shaped everything that followed. Gerald had been asking Lee for money for approximately 18 months. The first request came in the spring of 2023. He called her on a Wednesday evening and told her he had a short-term cash flow problem related to some work being done on the house, a roof situation that had gone over budget. He asked for $2,000. He framed it as a loan. Lee told me about the call the next morning over coffee, and I watched her face while she talked, and I could see that she already knew what kind of loan it was going to be. She transferred the money anyway. She loves her father. I understand that. I have never tried to alter that. The second request came 4 months later, in late summer. This time it was $5,000. Gerald said Donna's car had needed unexpected repairs and then a week later had needed to be replaced entirely, and the replacement had stretched further than their budget could absorb right now. Lee told him she did not have $5,000 available. She was not lying. She had recently started the job she currently holds, a position in patient intake coordination at a regional medical group, and her salary was not generous in those early months. Gerald pushed back. He made a comment about how she was living rent-free, which was not technically accurate. She was contributing to household expenses, and Lee ended the call and cried in her bedroom for 20 minutes, and I sat with her until it passed. She did not send the $5,000. She sent $700. She told him it was what she had. Gerald said thank you. He also said, according to Lee's account, that he had hoped for more, and that it was hard getting older without having built the kind of security that protects you from situations like this. I noted that comment. I noted it specifically and deliberately. I filed it under the category of things that would matter later. The third request came in January of 2024. This one was for $3,000. Gerald said it was for a medical bill that had come through after a procedure Donna had needed in December. He said the insurance had covered less than expected. Lee told him flatly that she did not have it and could not send it. This was true. Her budget was tight. Rosie had had a respiratory infection in November that had generated its own set of costs, and Lee had drawn down her personal savings to cover a car repair in December. She had nothing to give him. Gerald said he understood. He did not contact her again for about 2 months. I want to tell you something now that I did not tell anyone in my family at the time, because I was watching all of this and drawing my own conclusions. In the 9 months that Gerald had been making these requests, I had been watching him manage money the way someone manages money when they are fundamentally unwilling to confront the gap between what they earn and what they spend. Gerald is not a poor man. He has a pension from the state transportation department, where he worked for 22 years. He has Social Security income that started when he turned 62. He owns the house outright, there is no mortgage. Between his pension and Social Security, he and Donna live on a combined income that, while not lavish, is genuinely sufficient for two people whose housing costs are zero. He does not have a gambling problem, to my knowledge. He does not have an addiction. What Gerald has is a pattern of making commitments slightly larger than his ability to meet them, and then looking sideways at the nearest person with access to money when the bill comes due. I had watched this pattern for 12 years of marriage. I knew exactly what it looked like. And when Lee told me about the third request, the one she turned down, I had a quiet, cold certainty settle in my chest, the kind that feels less like an emotion and more like a diagnosis. If he had stopped asking Lee directly, he had not stopped needing. He had just changed direction. I want to pause here and tell you about something I had been building during these same 18 months because it matters. When Lee moved back in with me in the late summer of 2023, I was working as a project coordinator for a mid-sized commercial real estate development company called Meridian Properties. I had been with Meridian for 6 years at that point. I was not in a senior role. I was competent, reliable, invisible in the way that women in coordinator positions often are, present enough to keep things running, not prominent enough to be a topic of conversation. My salary was $58,000 a year. That is not a secret. I was not hiding anything about my professional life. What I had been doing quietly, over the course of about 3 years prior to Lee moving home, was building a small but solid real estate investment position of my own. I had purchased a rental property, a duplex in a transitional neighborhood about 12 miles from where I live in early 2021, at a price of $187,000. I had put 20% down, financing the remainder through a 30-year fixed mortgage. By the time this story reaches its confrontation, that property had appreciated to a documented value of approximately $240,000. The two rental units had been generating income since March of 2021. Nothing lavish, but real, documented, growing equity in my own name. I had not told Gerald about this property. I had not told Donna. I had mentioned it to Leigh, briefly, once, when explaining our household budget, and she had absorbed the information without much comment because she was focused on Rosie and her new job and the ordinary work of reestablishing herself. The property was mine. It sat in my name on a deed at the county recorder's office. It generated rental income that I managed through a property management company named Eastside Realty Solutions, and the manager I worked with, a man named Robert Fenn, had been handling the operational side for me since the beginning. I want to be clear about why I had not announced this investment to Gerald or Donna. It was not complicated. I had watched Gerald's financial approach for long enough to understand that the existence of assets he could perceive as accessible would simply increase his sense that solutions to his problems were available to him. I was not Lee. I was his ex-wife. He had no claim on me and no mechanism to reach me. But Donna would have mentioned it to Lee in a way that felt conversational and warm, and then Lee would have been put in the position of fielding Gerald's logic about how property equity could surely generate a small loan, and I did not want Lee in that position. So I kept it quiet. There was one other thing I had been doing during this period, and this is the piece that mattered most by the time October arrived. In March of 2024, 2 months after Gerald's third request to Lee, the one she turned down, I made an appointment with a family law and estate planning attorney named Carmen Reyes. Her office is located in the financial district of our city, on the 14th floor of a building I had walked past dozens of times without knowing what was in it. A colleague at Meridian had recommended her after going through her own estate restructuring. I will tell you what I consulted Carmen about, and I will tell you that the full picture of what she helped me set up did not emerge until later. But the first conversation covered the guardianship documentation for Rosie, the trustee structure of her medical fund, and the question of what legal standing any of Gerald and Donna's relatives would have in the event that something happened to Lee or to me. Carmen had looked at me over the rim of her glasses and said, "You are thinking about someone trying to access the child's accounts through informal pressure rather than legal mechanism?" I had said yes. She had said, "Good, let's make that very difficult." We spent 2 hours together that first meeting. I left with a list of 3 things to do before our next appointment. I did all 3 within the following week. Carmen and I met again in April and once more in early June. By the end of June, the trust documentation around Rosie's medical fund had been quietly restructured in a way that required dual signature authorization, both mine and Lee's, for any withdrawal above $50. Below $50, a single trustee signature was sufficient, but anything meaningful required both of us, which meant that someone withdrawing $300 or $400 at a time, consistently, over 6 months, someone doing it in amounts calculated to stay below a threshold they had guessed at, had found a way around a protection they did not know had been strengthened, or they had found a way around the old protection, before the restructuring. I did not discover the withdrawals until Rosie told me, but when I pulled the statements, the dates told me everything. The restructured trust documentation had been finalized and registered on June 27, 2024. Every single withdrawal on those statements had occurred before that date. 7 of them, starting in January and running through the third week of June, all of them in amounts between $250 and $410. Someone had been moving quickly. Someone had known or sensed that a window was open and had used it before it could close. That is what I was thinking about as I sat in the parking lot of Midwest Heritage Bank on that Tuesday morning in October, with the printed statements folded in my hand and Rosie's school drop-off 40 minutes behind me, and the whole rest of the day open in front of me like a field I had not expected to cross so soon. I called Carmen from the car. She picked up on the second ring. "I need to know the exact legal term," I told her, "for what happens when an adult accesses a child's trust account without authorization from the registered trustees." There was a brief pause on her end. Not surprise, Carmen does not do surprise audibly, but the particular quality of attention that told me she had understood immediately what I was saying. "Unauthorized disbursement from a custodial account," she said. "Depending on the total amount in the documentation, it can rise to the level of a felony theft charge. Are we talking about Rosie's medical fund?" "Yes." "How much is missing?" I looked at the statements. I had already run the arithmetic in the parking lot. $2,340, I said. "Over 6 months, 7 transactions." Carmen was quiet for 4 seconds. I counted. "How did the access happen? What mechanism?" This was the question I had not yet fully answered. The fund's debit card was stored in a small accordion folder in Lee's bedroom. Lee had shown it to me once, months ago, when she was going through paperwork. I had not thought about it since. I had not thought about it because I trusted Lee, and I trusted that the folder was in her room, and I had trusted the structural protections we had put in place. But the structural protections had only applied from June 27th onward. "I think someone had access to the card," I said. "Or to the account number. I don't know yet how they obtained it." "I want you to go home," Carmen said. "Don't confront anyone yet. Write down everything Rosie told you verbatim as close as you can remember it. Save the original statements, do not hand them to anyone, do not photograph them and send the photos to anyone in the family. Bring everything to me on Thursday morning. Can you make 9 o'clock?" I could make 9 o'clock. "Before Thursday," she continued. I want you to look at one thing. Every date on those withdrawals, write them down separately. Then I want you to think about who had physical access to your house or to Lee's personal belongings on or near each of those dates. I already knew the answer before she finished the sentence. I just needed to confirm it. I drove home. I sat at my kitchen table with a legal pad and a pen, and I wrote down all 7 dates in a column on the left side of the page. Then I went to my phone and opened the family calendar, the shared one that Lee and I both maintained for Rosie's appointments, school events, and family visits. Gerald and Donna visited roughly once a month, sometimes twice. They almost always came on weekends. They were affectionate grandparents in the surface presentation of it. Donna brought Rosie small gifts, Gerald read to her. Everyone sat around the living room and ate food and talked about ordinary things. I went through every visit in the past 8 months. Then I went back to my list of dates. 5 of the 7 withdrawals fell within 4 days of a documented visit from Gerald and Donna. One fell on the exact day of a visit. The remaining 2 were within a week of visits, in months where I could not confirm the precise weekend. I set the pen down. There is a particular feeling that comes when a thing you suspected becomes a thing you know. It is not satisfying in the way that people sometimes expect resolution to be satisfying. It is heavier than that. It carries the weight of the actual, and the actual is always more complicated than the suspected. If you have ever looked at a list of dates and understood, all at once, the full picture of a betrayal you had only been seeing the edges of, you know exactly what I felt in that moment at my kitchen table. I had less than 48 hours before Lee would ask me, inevitably, what was going on. She had noticed something in my face that morning when Rosie had come to me at breakfast. Lee has always been able to read me, even when I think I have closed every window. I had told her Rosie had said something sweet and that I was just feeling emotional about how fast she was growing up. Lee had accepted this with the particular patience of a 23-year-old who suspects her mother is processing something but knows better than to push. I had 48 hours. And I was not going to waste them. There is something I want to tell you about the period between that Tuesday and the Thursday morning when I met with Carmen, because it was not the quiet, contained 2 days it might sound like in summary. On Wednesday evening, Gerald called Lee. I know this because Lee came to me afterward with her phone face down on the table, and that particular expression she gets. She presses her lips together, and her eyes go very slightly unfocused, like she is translating something from a language she did not ask to learn. He had called, she told me, to let her know that he and Donna were planning to come by on Saturday. He wanted to take Rosie to the petting zoo that had just opened near their side of town. He had presented this as a spontaneous grandparents wanting to see the grandchild thing. He had not mentioned money. He had been warm and easy on the phone. Lee looked at me. Is it okay if they come Saturday? I thought about Carmen's office at 9 on Thursday morning. I thought about the list of dates on my legal pad. I thought about what Saturday would look like if Gerald walked into my house without knowing what I knew, and what it would look like if he walked in after I had met with Carmen and made decisions. Let's see how Thursday goes, I said. I might need to move some things around this week. I'll let you know by Friday morning, okay? Lee looked at me for a moment. She did not push. Okay, she said. She trusted me. I want you to understand the weight of that trust, because it shaped every decision I made in the days that followed. Lee had come back to my house with a 6-year-old and a broken beginning, and a salary that was still building itself, and she had put herself in the shelter of what I was able to offer. I had never told her about the full scope of what I was building or why. She trusted me without knowing the particulars, and that trust was not something I was willing to damage by moving carelessly. I also want to tell you about something that happened Wednesday morning, before Gerald's call, because it changed my understanding of the timeline. I had gone into Lee's room to look for the accordion folder. Lee was at work. Rosie was at school. I was not searching in any dramatic sense. I knew approximately where the folder was, and I was going to verify that the card was still in it. It took me about 4 minutes to find the folder on the second shelf of Lee's closet, behind a stack of Rosie's outgrown clothing that was waiting to be donated. The folder was there. I opened it. The debit card was not inside. I looked through every pocket of the folder twice. Then I checked the small tray on Lee's dresser where she kept loose items. I checked the drawer of the nightstand. I checked the small basket on the closet shelf where Lee kept receipts. The card was not there. I sat down on the edge of Lee's bed and I thought about this for a long time. The card's absence meant one of two things. Either someone had taken the card and had it somewhere, or someone had used it, disposed of it, and the account had since been flagged or frozen in some way I was not aware of. When I had checked the statements at the bank, the account had shown a current balance of $1,060, which meant the account was still active. which meant the card, if it existed somewhere, could theoretically still be used. I called Robert Fenn at Eastside Realty to postpone a maintenance discussion we had scheduled for that afternoon. Then I drove back to the bank. The branch manager was a woman named Sandra, whose last name I did not catch clearly, but whose manner was so careful and methodical that I found myself grateful for it. I explained that I was a co-trustee of a custodial account for a child who was a dependent of mine, and that I had reason to believe there had been unauthorized access to the account, and that I needed to understand the mechanism by which the withdrawals had been processed. Sandra asked me for identification and for the trust documentation. I had brought copies of both. The withdrawals had been processed as point-of-sale transactions, meaning a physical debit card had been used. The transactions had taken place at three different locations: an ATM at a pharmacy chain about 6 miles from my house, a grocery store checkout, and twice at what appeared to be a gas station terminal. All locations were within a reasonable driving distance of either my address or Gerald and Donna's address. Sandra processed a card deactivation while I was there. She also flagged the account for a fraud review, which she explained would generate a formal report within 5 to 7 business days. I thanked her. I drove to Carmen's office and left a message with her assistant about the card deactivation, so Carmen would have that information before our Thursday morning meeting. Then I drove home, and I made Rosie's after-school snack, and I sat with her while she told me about her day at school, something about a disagreement over crayons that had been resolved through the intervention of her teacher, a woman named Ms. Olivarez, who Rosie described as very fair, and I kept my face soft and present, and I listened to every word. That evening, after Rosie was asleep, I poured myself a glass of water and stood at the kitchen window for about 10 minutes looking at the backyard. The light over the garage was on. A neighbor's cat was walking along the fence line. I thought about Gerald. I thought about the version of him that I had married, which was a man who was not unkind, not fundamentally cruel, not malicious in any clean or simple way. He was the kind of person who became smaller under financial pressure, not meaner, exactly, but more willing to justify things he would otherwise know were wrong. I had watched that contraction happen during our marriage. I had watched it accelerate after the divorce, in the years when he was rebuilding without the financial structure our two-income household had provided. I do not think he planned this coldly. I do not think he sat down one January morning and decided to steal from a 6-year-old's medical fund with full awareness of what he was doing. I think he needed money. I think he found the card, found it, or found the account number during a visit when he was in Lee's room for some innocent reason, and noticed the folder and thought, in the way that people think when desperation has loosened their ethics, that $300 was not so much, that he would return it, that nobody would notice, that it was practically family money anyway. That is the story I imagine he told himself. And I imagine he told it 7 times, incrementally, with small adjustments each time that made the next withdrawal feel continuous with the ones before it rather than a separate decision. That kind of gradual self-permission is not unusual in people under financial pressure. Understanding it did not make me less angry, but it gave me a frame that was useful for what I needed to do next. If you have ever been the person who had to decide how much grace to extend to someone who has failed a child's trust, not your own trust, a child's trust, the most protected and uncomplicated kind, then you know that the anger and the understanding can both be true at the same time, and that neither of them determines what you do next. What you do next is determined by something cooler and more structural. What you do next is determined by what you have prepared. On Thursday morning at 9 o'clock, I walked into Carmen Reyes' office on the 14th floor with the printed statements, the legal pad with my date list, and a copy of the trust documentation. Carmen's paralegal, a young man named Oliver who moved through the office with a quiet efficiency I had come to appreciate, took my coat and brought me coffee I did not ask for but was grateful for. Carmen was already at her desk. She looked at me over those glasses and said, "Tell me everything." I told her everything. She wrote the entire time I was talking. Her handwriting was small and very fast. She did not interrupt me. When I finished, she reviewed her notes for about 90 seconds, then looked up. "The card," she said. "Where is it now?" "Deactivated. The branch manager processed it Wednesday." "The fraud review?" "Flagged, generating a report within 5 to 7 business days." She nodded. "Good, that report is going to matter." She paused. "Nora, I want to be very direct with you. What you're describing is felony theft from a custodial account. The aggregate amount, $2,340, exceeds the threshold for a misdemeanor in this state. This is a degree felony under the current statute. Depending on how the DA's office chooses to pursue it, your ex-husband could be looking at significant legal exposure. I said, I know. She looked at me. What do you want to do? I had been thinking about this since Tuesday morning. I had turned it over every way I could think of. I had thought about Rosie, who called Gerald Pop Pop, and had shown him a drawing of a horse last month that he had held up and said was the most beautiful horse he had ever seen. I had thought about Lee, who loved her father with the complicated, unresolvable love of a child whose parent has disappointed them in ways too foundational to simply release. I had thought about what a formal criminal charge would do to the shape of the family that Lee was trying to build for Rosie going forward. And I had thought about the $2,340 that was supposed to pay for the dental care of a 6-year-old who had done nothing except exist and trust the adults around her. I want the money back, I said. Every dollar, I want it documented. And I want him to understand clearly with the full weight of what I know that this can never happen again. Carmen looked at me for a moment. You are not filing criminal charges. Not yet, I said. I want him to understand that the option is open. She wrote something down. What I can do is prepare a formal demand letter, citing the unauthorized disbursements, the account documentation, the fraud flag, and the trust terms. It will reference the applicable criminal statute. It will give him 14 days to return the full amount to the account. It will not be ambiguous about what happens if he does not comply. Yes, I said, that? And you want to do this at a confrontation. It was not quite a question. She had worked with me long enough to know how I thought. I want to look at him when he understands what he did, I said. And I want Lee there, because she deserves to know the truth from me in my own words, not from a letter that arrives while I am not home. Carmen set her pen down. Saturday, she said. He's coming Saturday. He is. She looked at the calendar on her desk. I can have the demand letter ready by Friday afternoon. She picked up the pen again. Oliver will call you when it is ready for pickup. She looked back at her notes. Nora, I want to ask you something. Go ahead. The duplex on Alderman Street. She said it the way she always said financial details, matter-of-factly, without weight, because for Carmen, money is just a measurement. If Gerald pushes back, if he argues, if he attempts to make this into a dispute about your family finances rather than his conduct, are you prepared for that conversation? I thought about the property. I thought about the deed in my name. I thought about the 2 rental units in Robert Fenn and the 3 years I had spent building something that nobody in my family had asked about or thought to ask about because they had filed me, a long time ago, under a category that did not include property ownership. Yes, I said. I am prepared for that conversation. Carmen almost smiled. It was not quite a smile, but it was the closest expression she had to one. Good, she said. Then let's talk about Saturday. Oliver called me at 4:47 on Friday afternoon to tell me the letter was ready. I drove to Carmen's office and signed for it and put it in a manila folder in my bag. I did not review it in the car. I had trusted Carmen to write exactly what we had discussed, and I did not need to read it again to know what it said. I drove home. Lee was making dinner. Rosie was at the kitchen table with a coloring book, working on something with great seriousness. She looked up when I came in and said, I'm making a dog. It's a beautiful dog, I said. She held it up. It was an abstract shape in 6 colors that could have been a dog or a cloud or a map of somewhere wonderful. Pop Pop is coming tomorrow, she said. He's going to take me to see the animals. I set my bag down carefully with the folder inside it. I know, sweetheart, I said. I know he is. That night, after Rosie was in bed and Lee was in the shower, I sat at the kitchen table with the 2 printed bank statements, Rosie's medical fund account, and the separate account where I had documented the correlation with Gerald's loan requests to Lee, laid flat in front of me, side by side. The kitchen was quiet. The light over the stove was on. The neighbor's cat was not on the fence. I had been counting out by then for a long time, not bitterly, not with noise. Quietly, the way that preparation is always quiet when it is real. I thought about the first time I had deposited money into Rosie's medical fund, standing in a bank branch with a sleeping newborn against my chest. I thought about Dr. Yuki Tanaka saying, at an 18-month checkup, that the fund was a genuinely wise investment in Rosie's comfort. I thought about the 7 dates in a column on my legal pad. I thought about Carmen's office and Oliver's careful efficiency, and the demand letter in the manila folder in my bag. I thought about the look I had seen on Gerald's face at Lee's graduation, 4 years ago, a look of genuine pride that I believe was real, because whatever Gerald's failures are, his love for Lee has always been real in its own limited way. I thought tomorrow is going to be hard. And then I thought I have been building toward hard things for a long time and I have not flinched yet. The statements were on the table. The folder was in my bag. My attorney had done her part. All I had left to do was wait for him to walk through the door. Gerald arrived at 12:45 on Saturday afternoon, which was 15 minutes earlier than Lee had said he would. I was in the kitchen when I heard the knock, and I heard Rosie's feet hit the floor in the living room, and the sound of her running toward the front door with the complete physical commitment that 6-year-olds bring to every approach. I stood at the counter. I had the manila folder from Carmen's office in the cabinet above the refrigerator, behind the extra paper towels. The bank statements were on the counter, face down beneath a kitchen towel. I had decided the night before on the exact sequence of what I was going to do, and I had not changed my mind, and I was not going to change it now. I heard Gerald's voice in the entryway. Low, warm, the grandfather voice he used with Rosie that was the most genuine sounding version of him. I heard Donna's voice behind it, slightly higher, saying something about the traffic on the interstate. I heard Rosie announce that she had made a new drawing. Did they want to see it? I heard Gerald say that there was nothing he wanted more. Lee appeared in the kitchen doorway. Her expression was not quite a question, but it was adjacent to one. They're here, she said. I know. I turned and put the kettle on. Can you take them to the living room? I'll bring drinks in a few minutes. She looked at me for 2 seconds. Then she went back down the hallway. I stood at the counter while the kettle heated. Through the kitchen doorway, I could hear the sounds of a normal Saturday afternoon. Rosie explaining her drawing, Gerald saying appreciative things, Donna asking about the petting zoo logistics, Lee answering questions about whether Rosie had eaten lunch. The ordinary ambient noise of a family gathering that was not, in any meaningful sense, ordinary. I brought a tray of drinks to the living room after about 8 minutes. 4 glasses of water, a mug of coffee for Gerald, he had always taken it black, and a small plate of cookies that Rosie immediately assessed and approved of. Gerald looked up when I came in. Nora. He stood the way he always did, the automatic courtesy of a certain generation of man. He looked comfortable. He looked like someone who had driven 40 minutes to take his granddaughter to a petting zoo and expected the afternoon to be unremarkable. I set the tray on the coffee table. Gerald, Donna, good to see you. Donna smiled at me with genuine warmth. I want to be clear about this because it matters to how the next hour unfolded. Donna was not a villain in any clean sense. She was a woman who had spent a long time managing the consequences of Gerald's decisions, and I think she did it out of love, and I think she knew less than I feared she did. And I think when the truth arrived for her that afternoon, it arrived the way hard truths arrive for genuinely kind people, with a kind of sick disorientation, like the ground has moved without warning. We talked about ordinary things for approximately 20 minutes. Rosie sat between Gerald and Donna on the sofa and showed them both her drawing in detail, explaining each color choice with the focused authority of a person who knows exactly what they have made regardless of whether anyone else can identify it. Gerald asked questions about each section of the drawing with complete seriousness. Donna asked Rosie if the blue part was the sky or water, and Rosie said it was neither, it was a feeling. Gerald said that was very advanced. Rosie said she knew. I watched Gerald during these 20 minutes. I watched the way he held his coffee mug, both hands, the way he had always done, and the way he leaned forward when Rosie spoke, and the particular crease at the corner of his eyes when he was genuinely smiling versus when he was performing. He was genuinely smiling now. He loved Rosie. I do not doubt that. That is perhaps the most complicated part of the whole afternoon, and I have not found a clean way to resolve it, so I will simply tell you that it is true. At around the 30-minute mark, Donna mentioned the petting zoo. She said she had looked it up and it opened at 2, and they should probably think about leaving by 1:30 to get a good parking spot. She looked at Rosie. Does that sound like a plan, sweet girl? Rosie slid off the sofa immediately. I need my shoes, she announced and left the room. Lee looked at me. I had told her that morning, over breakfast while Rosie was watching a show in the other room, that I needed to speak with Gerald before they left. I had not told her why. I had told her it was important and that I needed her to stay in the room. She had asked if it was bad. I had said, it is something that needed to be addressed, and today is the day I am going to address it. She had looked at me for a long moment and then she had said okay, and she had not asked again. She gave me a small, almost imperceptible nod now. I stood up. Gerald, I said, I need about 10 minutes before you go. Can you sit with me at the kitchen table? Something passed across his face. Not guilt, not yet. More like the brief internal recalibration of a man who had expected a straightforward afternoon and has just registered that it might not be. He glanced at Donna. Donna was already looking at him. Of course, he said. Sure, Nora. We moved to the kitchen. Lee came with us without being asked. Donna followed because leaving would have felt strange and staying was the only available option. Rosie was in her bedroom finding her shoes, a process that in this household typically required 4 to 7 minutes and occasional consultation. I had the kitchen towel still on the counter, over the bank statements. I moved it aside before I sat down. I put both statements face down on the table between us. I did not reach for the folder above the refrigerator yet. That was the third piece. We were not at the third piece. Gerald sat across from me. His hands were on the table, flat. Donna sat beside him, slightly angled, the way she always sat, like she was present but not quite claiming the space as hers. Lee sat to my left, her chair pulled slightly back from the table, her arms folded. She was watching me. I looked at Gerald. Rosie told me something on Tuesday morning, I said. She told me that her grandmother had been taking money out of her bank account. The flatness of it landed differently than a more dramatic opening would have. I had thought about how to begin this conversation for 4 days, and I had decided that the plainest possible statement was the right tool. No warm up, no softening. The fact, stated clearly in the open. Gerald did not move for approximately 3 seconds. I watched his face with a specific kind of attention, not looking for guilt exactly, but for the particular shape of a person understanding that a thing they thought was invisible has been seen. I saw it, it was small. It was a slight tightening around his eyes, a fractional stillness, a quality of arrested motion, like someone who has been walking normally and has just noticed ice on the sidewalk ahead. He was still for 1 second too long. And then he said, "What do you mean?" His voice was even. I had expected that. Gerald was not a person who panicked loudly. He had always managed his distress with a kind of studied reasonableness that could be, in the right context, very convincing. "Rosie's medical fund," I said. "The custodial account at Midwest Heritage Bank that was established to cover her dental care starting at age 7. She told me her grandmother had been taking money from it." Gerald glanced at Donna. Donna had gone very still, not the guilty stillness of someone caught, but the alert stillness of someone who has just received information that does not fit the shape of the world she understood herself to be living in. "Nora," Gerald said carefully, "I think there might be a I'm not sure what Rosie thought she saw, but." I turned over the first bank statement. I placed it in front of him without a word. 7 rows, 7 dates, 7 amounts. The account number at the top. Rosie's name in the trust designation field. My name as guardian trustee. Lee's name as co-trustee. Gerald looked at the statement. His hands, which had been flat on the table, moved slowly, almost involuntarily, toward each other. He did not touch the paper. Lee leaned forward from her chair. I watched her eyes move across the page. I watched the moment she understood what she was seeing. Her arms, which had been folded, came apart. She pressed both hands flat on the table. "Dad." It came out very quiet. "What is this?" Gerald opened his mouth. He closed it. He looked at the statement again. Then he said, "Lee, I can explain. 7 transactions," I said. My voice was level, not cold, not warm, factual. The way Carmen had taught me to deliver information in a room where emotions were already doing the work and I did not need to add to them. Between January 14th and June 19th of this year. 7 withdrawals totaling $2,340. "Nora." Gerald's voice had shifted. The evenness was still there, but there was something underneath it now, the beginning of a pressure change. "I was going to put it back. I want you to know that I fully intended. The account was for Rosie's dental care." Lee's voice was not loud, but it had a quality in it I had heard only a few times before, a stripped-down quality, like something had been removed from it. That money was for Rosie. Donna put her hand to her mouth. She looked at Gerald. The look on her face was not the look of someone being exposed alongside a partner. It was the look of someone who has just understood that there is a room in the house they did not know existed. "Gerald," she said. His name, nothing else. But the way she said it held about 20 years of weight. Gerald looked at his wife. Something crossed his face that I would describe as the particular grief of a man watching a version of himself he had maintained for a long time begin to come apart. He turned back to me. "I needed it short term," he said. "Things were tight and I thought Rosie wouldn't need it for another year or two and I was going to put it back before then. I swear to you, Nora." I looked at him for a moment. "You went to Lee 3 times asking for money," I said. "She said no or gave you what she could, and then you found another way." The silence in the kitchen was absolute. Through the hallway, I could hear Rosie in her bedroom, talking to herself the way she did when she was looking for something, a running narration of her own search, cheerful and self-directed. "I didn't know what else to do," Gerald said. And here is the thing about that statement, I believed it was true. It was also not a justification. Both of those things were simultaneously real. Lee pushed her chair back from the table and stood up. She walked to the kitchen window and stood there with her back to the room, one hand on the counter, looking out at the backyard. She did not say anything for about 15 seconds. Then, without turning around, "How did you even get access to the card?" "A beat," Gerald said. "I found it in your room. I wasn't looking for it. I was getting Rosie's sweater from your closet. You asked me to, you remember, when we were watching Rosie last March. It was in a folder on the shelf. I saw it. I noted the account number." Lee turned around then. Her face had a very specific expression on it. Not rage, something quieter than rage and harder to resolve. "You wrote down my daughter's account number from a card you found in my closet." Gerald did not answer that. I reached up and opened the cabinet above the refrigerator. I took out the manila folder. I set it on the table and opened it, and I placed Carmen's letter in front of Gerald. He looked down at it. I watched him read the first paragraph. I watched the pressure change in his face deepen into something more complete. The letter was 3 pages. It named the account. It named the trust. It named the 7 transactions with dates and amounts. It cited the relevant statute, the one Carmen had mentioned to me on Thursday morning, the one that placed the aggregate unauthorized withdrawal into the range of a degree felony. It included a formal demand for the full $2,340 to be returned to the account within 14 days. Noted that Midwest Heritage Bank had already flagged the account for a fraud review, and that the formal report from that review was expected within 5 to 7 business days. It stated that if the demand was not met within the 14-day window, the documentation would be forwarded to the appropriate authorities. It was signed by Carmen Reyes, attorney at law. Gerald's hands, which had been moving toward each other for the past several minutes, had now come fully together. His fingers were laced. He was pressing his thumbs against each other, a rhythmic, tight pressure. He looked up from the letter. His face had the look of a person who has been operating in a small room and has just understood how small it is. Nora, he said, I'm asking you, please. The 14 days starts today, I said. Donna made a sound. It was not a word. It was the sound of someone absorbing something that has reorganized the air around them. She stood up from the table, which surprised me. She had been so still through all of it, and she walked to the other side of the kitchen and stood near the stove, facing away from both of us, one hand pressed to the back of her neck. Gerald, her voice was very quiet. Tell me you did not do this. Gerald said nothing. Tell me you did not take money from Rosie's account. She turned around then. Her eyes were bright with something I recognized as the particular brightness that precedes tears in a person who does not cry easily. She is 6 years old, Gerald. She is 6 years old and you took money from her medical fund. I was going to put it back, Gerald said, and it sounded, this time, like what it was, a man saying the only thing he had left to say. Donna looked at him for a long moment, then she looked at me. In that look was something I had not expected, not apology exactly, but a kind of acknowledgement that went deeper than apology. An acknowledgement that she understood, without me having to articulate it, the full weight of what had been taken. Not just the money, the trust, the specific, irreplaceable trust of a child's protection fund. Lee had come back to the table. She was standing, not sitting. Her hands were at her sides. I want to know something, she said. Her voice had that stripped quality again. The last time you called and asked me for money and I told you no. Did you go home that same week and use Rosie's card? A pause, Gerald's thumbs pressed together. Lee, answer me? He looked at his daughter for a moment, then, yes. The silence after that word had a different quality than the silences before it. It was the silence of a thing that had been said and could not be unsaid. Lee absorbed it with a stillness that cost her. I could see the cost of it in the way she was holding herself, in the careful management of her own breathing. Then she turned to me. What do we do now? This was the question I had been ready to answer since Tuesday morning. The bank's fraud review will generate a report that documents everything, I said. Carmen's letter gives him 14 days to return the full amount. If he meets that deadline, we hold the documentation. If he does not, we forward it. The fraud report alone, combined with the demand letter, is enough for the DA's office to pursue charges. A degree felony carries up to 5 years. Carmen has made that very clear in the letter. Gerald's eyes came back to mine. Whatever remained of the studied reasonableness he had been maintaining was gone now. He looked like what he was, a 62-year-old man who had made a series of choices in the direction of less resistance, each one a small moral concession, until he had arrived somewhere he could not have predicted from the first step and could not talk his way out of from the last. I'll get the money, he said. I will get all of it, I swear to you. You have 14 days. I'll have it sooner. I'll transfer it this week. Then this week it is, I said. And Gerald, the account has been restructured. Any future access attempt by anyone through any mechanism will trigger an automatic notification to Carmen's office and to the bank's fraud department simultaneously. That is already in place. I looked at him steadily. There is no more window. He looked down at the table. From the hallway came the sound of small feet on hardwood, and then Rosie appeared in the kitchen doorway wearing one shoe and holding the other. She looked at the 4 adults in the kitchen with the pragmatic assessment of a 6-year-old evaluating a situation she cannot entirely interpret. I found my shoe, she announced. Are we going to see the animals? Nobody spoke for about 3 seconds, then Lee moved first. She crossed the kitchen to Rosie, knelt down, and took the second shoe. Let me help you with that, Bug. Her voice was steady. The steadiness cost her something I saw very clearly from where I was sitting. She put the shoe on Rosie's foot, tied it with care, and stood up. She looked at me over Rosie's head, a question. I gave her a small nod. Lee looked at Gerald. I'll take Rosie to the petting zoo, she said. Her voice had the stripped quality still, but it was held now controlled. You and I will talk later this week. She looked at Donna. Donna, you can come with us if you want to? Donna crossed the kitchen and stood at Lee's side. She did not look at Gerald as she passed him. She put her hand briefly on Lee's arm, a light touch pressed once then released. I would like that, she said softly. They took Rosie out. I heard the front door. I heard Rosie asking Donna whether goats were her favorite animal. I heard Donna say she had always been partial to the goats, yes. And then the kitchen was just Gerald and me. He was still at the table. He had not moved since Rosie came in. He was looking at the demand letter, not reading it, just looking at it with the expression of a person who has stopped pretending that documents are things that happen to other people. I sat back down across from him. You know, I said, after a moment, the part I keep coming back to is that you knew what that account was for. You were there when Lee talked about it. You knew it was for Rosie's teeth. You knew a pediatric dentist had told us to start saving because the work was going to be necessary and it was going to be expensive. I was not angry when I said this. I want to be precise about that. The anger had been present 3 days ago and it had done its work, and what was left now was something cooler and more considered. And you used it anyway, Gerald said. I know. Not as a loan from Lee, which would have been wrong but would have been between the two of you. From a 6-year-old's medical account. I know. His voice was rough with something I recognized as genuine shame, not the performed shame of someone managing a situation, but the real kind, the kind that sounds like it hurts. I looked at him for a moment. I am not your enemy, Gerald. I never was, but I need you to understand something clearly. I folded my hands on the table. I have a property. I have an attorney. I have documentation going back 7 months. I have a fraud report in progress at the bank. I'm not someone you can afford to miscalculate, and I need you to have understood that before you leave today. He met my eyes. I understand. Good. I stood up. I left the statements and the demand letter on the table in front of him. You can take those with you. Carmen has copies of everything. He picked up the letter. He looked at it for a moment. Then he said quietly, I'm sorry, Nora. I know it doesn't fix it. No, I said, it doesn't. But the money will. I left him in the kitchen. I went to the living room and sat down on the sofa where Rosie had been showing her drawings 20 minutes ago, and I pressed the heels of my hands against my eyes for a moment and just breathed. My shoulders had been tight since Tuesday, and I had not noticed until that exact moment how tight they were. I let the breath out slowly, and then again, and the tightness began, gradually to ease. I heard Gerald in the kitchen, the sound of the chair moving, his footsteps, the front door opening and closing. He was gone. I sat in the quiet living room for a few more minutes, then I called Carmen. She picked up on the third ring. How did it go? He acknowledged everything. He agreed to return the full amount this week. He took the letter. A pause. And Lee? She knows. She was there for all of it. How is she? I thought about Lee kneeling on the kitchen floor, putting Rosie's shoe on with careful, steady hands, holding herself together for the sake of a 6-year-old who just wanted to see the animals. She's strong, I said. She'll need some time. That's to be expected. Carmen was quiet for a moment. Nora, if the transfer comes through within the week as promised, you have a decision to make about the fraud report. The bank's review will complete regardless. If he repays and you choose not to forward the documentation to the DA, that is within your rights, but the report will exist, the record will exist. I know. What are you thinking? I thought about the demand letter. I thought about the statute Carmen had cited. I thought about Rosie on the sofa explaining that the blue section was a feeling. I thought about the fact that Gerald would be 63 in February, and that a felony record at 63 had consequences that rippled in directions I had not come here to send them. I thought about Lee, who would have to live with whatever I decided. If he pays the full amount within the week, I said, I will hold the documentation. The record will exist at the bank regardless. That is consequence enough if he makes this right. I paused. If he does not pay within 14 days, we forward everything. I am not negotiating that part. Understood, Carmen said. I'll note that in the file. Thank you, Carmen. For all of it, that's what you hired me for, she said, and then slightly softer. Take care of your family, Nora. I thanked her and ended the call. The full $2,340 appeared in Rosie's medical fund account on the following Wednesday morning. I received an alert on my phone at 8:17 while I was making Rosie's lunch. I checked the balance. I set the phone down on the counter. I finished making the lunch. When Rosie came into the kitchen and sat at the table, I put the plate in front of her, a half sandwich and apple slices, the same as always, and I looked at her for a moment while she evaluated the apple situation. Is something wrong? She asked, because she has always been able to read a room, even at 6. Nothing's wrong, I said. Everything is exactly right. She accepted this with the philosophical practicality of a person who has more pressing concerns and went back to the apple slices. In the weeks that followed, the shape of things reorganized itself gradually and without drama. Gerald transferred the money as promised. The bank's fraud review completed and its report was filed as an internal record. Carmen kept the documentation. No charges were filed. That was my decision, made with full knowledge of what I was choosing, and I stand by it, not because what Gerald did was acceptable, but because the alternative carried costs for Lee and for Rosie that I was not willing to impose without their consent. And when I asked Lee what she wanted, she said, I want the money back and I want him to know that I know. Both of those things had been achieved. Lee and Gerald spoke by phone about 10 days after the Saturday confrontation. I do not know exactly what was said. It was their conversation, not mine. What I know is that Lee came out of her room afterward looking lighter in some complicated way, the way people look when they have said something difficult that needed to be said and have survived the saying of it. She told me they had talked for an hour. She said her father had cried. She said she was not ready to see him yet, but that she thought, eventually, she might be. I told her to take whatever time she needed. Donna called me directly about 3 weeks after the confrontation. It was a Thursday evening. I was in my home office going over the monthly report from Eastside Realty when the phone rang. Donna said she had wanted to call sooner but had not known what to say. She said she had not known about any of it. I told her I believed her. She asked if there was anything she could do. I told her that what had needed doing had been done, and that what mattered now was the going forward. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, he has a problem, Nora, with money. He has always had it. I thought I was helping by managing around it. I see now that I wasn't. I said, I know, I watched it for 12 years. She said she was getting him to talk to someone, a financial counselor, and also a therapist who specialized in exactly this kind of pattern. I told her that sounded like the right direction. We ended the call with a warmth that surprised me a little, though it probably should not have. Donna had never been my enemy either. Rosie's dental evaluation in the spring confirmed what Dr. Tanaka had predicted. The orthodontic work was going to be substantial, starting the following year. The fund, now fully restored and quietly growing again with contributions from Lee and from me, was on track to cover it without hardship. Rosie herself was unconcerned about all of this. She had recently decided that she wanted to be an astronaut veterinarian, which she had explained to me was not two jobs but one job on a space station, and her current priorities were organized accordingly. My duplex on Alderman Street had its second unit turnover in the fall, the tenant moved for a job relocation, and I had the unit repainted and released within 6 weeks at a rate $40 a month higher than the previous lease. Robert Fenn handled most of it. I handled the decisions. The property was now valued, according to the most recent assessment, at approximately $255,000. I had begun preliminary conversations with Carmen about what a second investment property might look like within the next 18 months. We had not moved on it yet. We were in no hurry. At Meridian, I had taken on a senior coordination role that came with a title adjustment and a salary I was quietly satisfied with. Nobody at my company knew about the duplex. That was not a secret exactly, it was simply not their business. And I had learned, over several years, the particular value of keeping your financial life separated from the social calculus of your professional one. I think about that October Tuesday sometimes. The morning Rosie leaned across the breakfast table and told me something in a voice barely above a whisper, because she was not entirely sure she was allowed to say it. I think about the particular courage of that. She is 6. She did not have language for what she had noticed, and she told me anyway, and that telling made everything that followed possible. I did not tell her what had happened or what I had done about it. She does not need to know the details. What she knows is that her fund is safe, and that I am here, and that some things in her life are protected in ways that require nothing from her. That is enough. That is exactly enough. So, did I go too far by holding those documents rather than filing charges? Or not far enough? I genuinely want to know what you think.